Shining, dazzling faces, both on Moses in the story from Exodus and on Jesus in what we call the Transfiguration. In our sermons, preachers are generally looking for parallels with our lives right now. And I've never really found one for these stories until this week. I'm sure that some of you have seen the AI-generated video posted by President Trump. It's of the Gaza Strip, but instead of a land filled with the rubble of bombed buildings, it's a glitzy resort, complete with a massive golden statue of Donald Trump. It's a shiny, dazzling face. But rather than the transfiguration, the closer biblical connection is the golden calf, the reason why Moses is up on Mount Sinai in today's story. He's up there to get a second copy of the Ten Commandments because the first one on stone tablets broke when Moses threw them down in anger. Moses was angry because when he came down from the mountain after 40 days, the people had already broken the first commandment, not having any other gods before God, not making an idol, and not bowing down before it. They had made a golden calf and were worshiping it. That's the closer connection with the video of the golden statue in Gaza. There really is no parallel to the story of the Transfiguration. And that's the point. Undoubtedly, the disciples who were there would say the same. Seeing Jesus in his glory, seeing Moses and Elijah with him, having a cloud overshadow them, and hearing the voice of God say, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." For Peter, James, and John, this was something completely outside of their human experience. It was a direct encounter with God, something that left them speechless. In this encounter, they came face to face with the holiness of God, that God is not just like us. They experienced the greatness of God. And when they came down from the mountain, there is another transfiguration story, another experience of the greatness of God. Instead of a shining face, it's a disfigured face. A boy with something that today we would call epilepsy. A seizure would come over him and he would foam at the mouth and thrash around in convulsions. And just as the Father says, "This is my son, my chosen, listen to him," the father of the boy says, "This is my only son, look at him. Look at how he's suffering." And Jesus does look at him, and he does more than look. He heals the boy. It's another experience of the greatness of God. Jesus heals the boy after the disciples had not been able to heal him. So this is not only an experience of God's greatness embodied in Jesus, it's an experience of God's greatness in the midst of their own powerlessness. I'm sure many of us can identify with that feeling of powerlessness, of wanting and trying to heal in a world that is convulsing around us and not being able to. I have found it important to both remember and be on the lookout for experiencing God's greatness in my own life. It's not easy, but it has become a vital spiritual discipline for me. Monday was my sister Catherine's birthday, and she texted my husband Paul that the best thing that had happened to her that day was my phone call. It might not sound like an experience of God's greatness, but there is a backstory. Catherine lives in California, and we had a real break in our relationship 17 years ago. It was so bad that I didn't even tell her when we adopted our daughter, Sarah. We reestablished periodic connection over time, but until my trip there a couple of years ago, we didn't go much deeper. It was during my sabbatical, and it came from my version of a bucket list, which was the things I would deeply regret not doing before I die. I know that version of a bucket list might not sound too uplifting, but I believe that it was God's way of getting me to do something that really mattered to me. I went to visit her for a few days, and we had a lot of time, just the two of us. Rather than reconnecting, I think we connected at a whole different level, with a whole new relationship. It was an experience of God's greatness because it was just so much more than I ever could have imagined. And that greatness showed up in ways that are not as obvious as a deep connection. That greatness was in that nagging discomfort with how things were. Even though I felt so little motivation to do much about it for so many years, that nagging was still there. The greatness of God was surely in my bucket list of regrets I wanted to avoid that finally got me to act. And that greatness of God was in the wisdom and generosity of this congregation, who gave me a sabbatical, which allowed the space and time for me to visit my sister. The discipline of looking for the greatness of God is one that can ground us in this time. As we think about what the greatness of God looks like and where we experience it or see it, I have to say that Jesus really complicates things. We can see it in the context of this magnificent experience of the Transfiguration. Just before going up the mountain, Jesus has told his disciples what lies ahead. He's told them that he's going to suffer terribly, that he's going to be rejected by the religious leaders, that he's going to be killed, and on the third day raised. And not long after the glorious Transfiguration, he starts his journey to Jerusalem, where this will all happen. So the Transfiguration, an experience of the greatness of God, happens in the context of his impending suffering and death. And it's a gift to both Jesus and the disciples. It's a picture of where this is ultimately heading, the triumph of the resurrection. I say that Jesus complicates things because God's greatness is not just present in the Transfiguration and the resurrection. God's greatness is also there on the cross. That's a hard thing to take in and a hard thing to believe. Where is the greatness of God in the midst of incalculable suffering? Where is the greatness of God in the rubble graveyards of Gaza? Where is the greatness of God in the rubble of our federal government? The greatness of God is power to heal and restore. And all we see is destruction. Jesus refused to let violence, particularly the violence of an unjust system, go unchallenged. He knew that what he was doing and saying would ultimately lead to his death. Justo Gonzalez has a powerful way of describing the cross. He says, what Jesus does is to take violence upon himself, to direct it at himself, and to respond in the one way that violence cannot abide, with love and forgiveness. This is so radical that violence is defanged and does not know how to respond. This is the way of the cross. It's a very different kind of power and greatness. It's important to hold on to the hope of new life, the hope of resurrection, the place where it's a whole lot easier to see the greatness of God. It's also important to know that the greatness of God is there in the way of the cross. In our conversation following centering prayer on Wednesday, we talked about the spiritual practice of widening our lens, particularly in times like these. I think of it as looking to the margins, away from the centers of power. And a couple of days ago, I had the chance to meet Dr. Fadi Atrash, the CEO of Augusta Victoria Hospital in East Jerusalem. And this hospital, established by the Lutheran World Federation in 1950, has been a bedrock of medical care for Palestinians. Dr. Fadi and Sieglinde Weinbrunner from the Lutheran World Federation were here to speak with representatives and senators and to plead with them for the release of USAID funding. Augusta Victoria Hospital is the premier hospital for cancer treatment and kidney care. As they said, it used to be that funding cancer treatment for kids was a bipartisan issue, something that everyone was for. Incredibly, that's no longer true. In addition to world-class medical care, Dr. Fadi said what they provide to Palestinians who come is an experience of dignity. The patients are treated kindly and with respect. They receive the message that their lives have value, something that is sadly not a common experience for those living under occupation. Dr. Fadi is the father of young children. He shared, "It's hard to know what to say to them when they ask about the future, whether things will get better. As a parent, that's a terrible thing." I looked at these two servants of God, Fadi and Sieglinde. They looked worn and they looked sad. They are hurting themselves. Yet they are still trying to alleviate the suffering of others. They are still trying to be instruments of healing. That's the greatness of God, not bright and shiny, but beautiful. I continue to be haunted by Sieglinde's words to us. Thank you for caring. Thank you for caring. The heartbreaking truth is of that statement is that they had met so many people in places of power who do not care. We are in a moment like those disciples who couldn't heal the boy who was having seizures, experiencing that awful powerlessness. It is excruciating to watch suffering and to not be able to stop it. That expression of gratitude, thank you for caring, was an experience of God's greatness for me. To hear that just showing up, just being there to listen, mattered. God's greatness is all around us. Probably not as dazzling as Jesus on Transfiguration, but every bit as astounding. Thanks be to God. Amen. Our hymn is number 856, How Great Thou Art.